Have you or anyone you know seen the future? Have you seen what will happen in the next couple minutes? Do you know what will happen when you pick up that pitcher of water? You could drop it on your foot and fall over the cat, crush it, causing the fridge to fall on your face and die. This could happen to you or your children at any moment of your life. A plane could fall out of the air and hit your house. This would have a drastic impact on the economy because you, in your job at the local finance, insurance broker, whatever, control a key component of our own society. Have you or someone you know been involved in lambasting a coworker over some small trivial comment they made in the lunchroom? You may be entitled to compensation. Please contact us at Frivolous Gravitas Insurance today.
Bam.
Right. So we are today talking about
crappy
uncertainty.
Commercials. Please tell me we're talking about crappy commercials.
We could talk about crappy commercials, but this was a intro to talking about uncertainty. The world we live in is a very uncertain place. We think we know what we're doing. We think we have everything under control, but we don't. And that's actually okay as an individual. But this leads us into what we do as a society and as individuals when we encounter uncertainty in our lives and when we handle it poorly or well. So Chris is just going to lead us today on this topic. And we're going to start by looking at economic uncertainty, as it's seemingly the most obvious of these. Economic uncertainty happens, what will the stock market do? What will I do if I don't save up for my retirement? What will I do? Oh, I need to, put all my money away for this. So I'm just going to spend it because I don't know what's going to happen. And you react to uncertainty instead of reacting with logic. And usually this ends up badly for everyone involved. Or you simply live a dull life of meaningless safety and security for those who give up their freedoms for the benefit of their security deserve neither, as the quote goes. So what is it to deal with an uncertain perspective with regard to the economy? I'll lead this into you.
Thanks, Jordan. So I'm Chris Driver, and welcome back to Frivolous Gravitas. Jordan Roy here, my co-host, the one and only. Today we're going to be talking about uncertainty, as you precluded to, with a broad regard to everything that it applies to on a macroscopic level, right down to the microscopic level. And I think a best place to start with this would be economics, because in principle, economics isn't really a science, as we discussed in our previous episodes. It's more an establishment of formulae that distinguish relationships between separate subjects, entities, or objects, or whatever you want to call them, depending on the abstract layer that you're looking at. So economic uncertainty is often described by using price changes or cost benefit analysis and things like that. So most obviously, you could take a look at the stock market and see actions like more buying will happen when people are in a risk on, is what the jargon for the industry is. Risk on being you're okay with uncertain conditions because you're pretty confident that things are going well. That's generally a sign that people will be buying into the market. And when you buy into a market, on aggregate, more than you're selling into the market, then prices go up. Whereby if there's an equilibrium or a price stability, it's because there are an equal number of buyers and sellers. All other things being equal, obviously. There are external factors to all of this, but usually the external factors are what cause the uncertainty. So, for example, when the Suez Canal has a cargo shipping container ship or whatever plugging up the entire works, The uncertainty would be not knowing when the goods are going to be start flowing again, and that shortage of goods equates to a shortage of supply, which equates to a change in prices. So simple things like coffee beans, or if you live in Italy, that wheat. Oil obviously is a major transporter through the Suez Canal, with the oil producing nations of the Indian Ocean. And considering there are, 2.5 billion people on the continent of Africa and the country of India combined, and the Suez Canal flows right in between those two, that sort of says a lot about where the markets are going to move, based on external factors. So I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of economics in this episode, but just to start us off with, talking about how uncertainty affects people's behaviors. And in economic terms, that will be buying habits, but in other instances that we'll cover later on in the show, it'll translate pretty directly one-to-one with things like mental health disorders and anxiety, or national security, or things like that. So to start us off, I think it's important to point out that nothing can be known for not everything can be known for certain. This to say, right down to a quantum mechanical level, physics is fundamentally built on uncertainty. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle describes it and proves it, with the spin of electrons and the position and velocity, rather, not the spin, the position and velocity of electrons, in that you can find a particular point in space where an electron has existed after measurement, but that measurement itself is triggering the collapse of a probability function that describes where that electron could be, hypothetically, until it's, collapsed, the wave. So given that everything right down to the grassroots of nature is uncertain by definition of physics and natural laws, it is literally physically impossible to know everything or to have certainty about the world. So living with uncertainty is
Well, we live with this every day, with the scientific uncertainty of the most mundane thing ever, the weather. And meteorologists I feel like they're chagrined if you brought up, like, how come you guys don't know when it's going to rain? It's like, do you know how complex the weather is? Like, this is our best scientific guess, and we're dealing with uncertainty with the weather.
And it's better than not knowing at all. That's right. The point.
So it turns it from a unknown unknown to a known unknown. Rather than, but we're hoping we would like a known, but it's the weather.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and likewise, we don't break down just because it starts raining one day, but that we weren't expecting it, right? There are certain things we're completely comfortable with being uncertain. But if you lived in a country where there's a monsoon that you rely on every year, that uncertainty becomes very, very real in your life and in your culture, from like generations and generations of that same uncertainty. You could imagine that weather patterns changing not just affected societies, but actually governed and dictated their progression. Like, the way they've evolved was usually based on geographic and ecological factors that are unfathomable or incalculable in most cases. Not that the calculation can't exist, but the compute power can't be processed. It's just, that's why weather's so complicated. And we can get better at guessing, but making predictions is not the same thing as certainty, even when those predictions are right. We're still living with uncertainty every day, but I think the subject of today's discussion is sort of just differentiating between certainties that, or uncertainties that cause harm, and uncertainties that we manage and just deal with. And I think that's sort of the crux of what we're getting at today.
How I learned to give up and love the unknown.
Yes. The strange love of...
Yeah. So where do we want to take this?
Oh, well, we started off with economic uncertainty, and I gave a couple examples of price instability. But you could also talk about like investment instruments, and the types of sectors that people invest in, and government policies that change banking legislation, and the way the courts function, interpretations of law. It goes all the way down the stack, right through to universities and what they teach accountants and lawyers, and what they teach teachers to teach the university students, and so on. So that the knockdown effect of uncertainty is basically a field of study that we just ignore while we're in fields of study. And I think it's important that we take a minute aside and point out the lasting and impactful, significant effects of uncertainty in our day-to-day lives, from a macro to the micro level, because as we're doing in this episode, because it helps us guide ourselves forward. It helps us think better. It helps us manage our lives and plan better. It helps us make better decisions. And most fundamentally, it helps with our security, because a huge problem of uncertainty comes down to people's generalized feeling of insecurity. And I think that alone causes a tremendous amount of harm worldwide. And that's sort of my focus, where I'd like to take it today.
Yeah, so maybe I could propose a case study and we could pick it apart from there. We discover a new resource that can create power, and it's easy to dig up. It's actually quite clean. Blah 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 blah. It's not a bad thing.
Like thorium?
Yeah, thorium. Thorium's a good hypothetical thing that we could hypothetically create very clean reactors out of. Now, all of a sudden, it gets actual marketing, and people start learning about this. Now, generally, I'm not going to be too uncertain about this because it doesn't really affect me, but because, the prospect of a cheaper power bill sounds pretty cool. But if you are working in, say, a coal plant, for example, you might have a much different reaction. Now, your life consists of going to work, doing, putting in your hard hours and coming home, supporting your family. It's almost a beautifully simple life. But it relies on a status quo. And when that status quo is threatened in any way, anxiety begins. And this is that uncertainty. And when it becomes more real, the uncertainty becomes more real and the anxiety increases. And so you begin to see anything that threatens that status quo as a threat. Now, this becomes more abstract the longer it happens. So instead of like, oh, I'm worried about the market, you become, I hate thorium, or I hate anyone that brings it up or has a positive opinion about it. And then you go even more abstract up a layer of scope, and all of a sudden you hate, you don't like a party or something that proposes it. And then it becomes, when you get enough people doing this on either side, I'm not just saying it's just the coal people or the oil people here in Alberta, because both sides do this. And by both sides, I mean those inane definitions that we seem to be putting everyone in politically, that the uncertainty becomes a real manifestation of political and economic power. Not in the Foucauldian sense, but as in the exercise of politics. So it becomes an issue not of creating more power in the electrical sense, energy. It becomes an issue of
political power.
Yeah, political maneuvering and power. So the uncertainty of a relatively small group of people and the people associated with it, because this family who relies on the coal job is also supporting the local grocery store. They're also supporting local small businesses. The guy he banks with in the States, a lot of the banks are local. Not like up here in Canada where you get like countrywide banks. A lot of times there's small branches down there. But you also have like, the sporting goods store where he buys his, baseball equipment or whatever. And they're worried about this guy's job too, because he's a good customer. He spends his money there. So the uncertainty spreads. What's going to happen in this community? Because they've seen this happen before with, Cleveland and Detroit, with the auto industry changing in the 80s and 90s, and collapsing when manufacturing was moved elsewhere. And those cities are hellscapes now.
Some of them are even bankrupt.
Yeah.
Detroit.
Yeah, Detroit is
famous.
Yeah, I don't even have to get into that. So it becomes this thing that has no relation to the actual thing, and the uncertainty about it drives a process that is completely and utterly separate from the economics and the science of thorium, where someone could just build a reactor and start pumping out power, and new sectors would be had. We'd need to find and refine thorium. We'd need to build all the little new gadgets that kind of reactor would need. There's one of the things of innovation is it usually creates more jobs than it kills. And I'm not saying, well, you should learn to code, but there's going to be comparable things that need to be done. Now, the interim period is painful. I can definitely attest to that, having been laid off. But part of what, now this is kind of an accusation, part of what made America strong was the fact that, oh man, life sucks right now. I'm going to try and make it not suck by, putting some work in, because you're a free individual and you can do that. So,
and let's be real, like a coal miner's transferable skills are pretty much equivalent to any labor job. Mm-hmm. Anything you learn as a coal miner, even if you're the one burrowing,
heavy machinist, the
engineer can go into like retaining walls and landscaping, and the people who are hauling rock and sorting things out through jacks and pallets and stuff could all be working at warehouses. And you know what I mean? Like the machinery and the equipment used is all mechanics. Heavy duty mechanics can go work on train yards. So most of the skills are transferable, but even if they weren't, as you say, that's an opportunity to be better.
Yeah.
Whereas before, it's an opportunity only to regress. There's no way of getting any better from doing the same thing at a dead end.
So in uncertainty, this new reactor, which would have created new jobs, while the coal plant is probably still going to be open for a while, and is going to create new jobs and new industries, is now going to have to wait. And it's put in a zero-sum situation where either you're with the thorium reactors or you're with the coal guys. When we need power, just build one and phase one out slowly. That way, we have double the jobs for a while, and the new industries have time to give up. But now we have a longer interim period, and it creates more uncertainty, because that will ripple out through the entire economic cosmos of the economic sphere.
And when you don't have a mechanism already established, like a power plant already built that you can turn a switch on and off on, like nuclear power, one of the greatest parts to it is that you can turn it on and off, like basically with a switch. I mean, not literally that fast, but it's not like wind where it's intermittent.
Yeah, and if we build them better, it'll be a lot simpler than Chernobyl.
Yeah, Chernobyl wouldn't have happened if it was built in Canada or the States even back then. And especially now that we've had Chernobyls and Fukushimas, like there's no reason to build one that's susceptible to that type of catastrophe.
Right.
But like to have the plant there reduces certainty, even if you're not using it. And building the plant reduces people's personal certain uncertainty because they're establishing themselves in high tech, high intelligence jobs.
Mhm.
I don't want to. I'm not at all trying to denigrate people who do manual labor for a living. I've done it too. But what I'm saying is, in an economy that's founded on education, knowledge, and experience, and technology, and the useful application for productive labor is going to be through people's mental capacities moving forward.
Right.
That's just a given.
Well, and if you have
Stopped farming
kids,
by hand years ago because nobody should be doing that.
right? Because farming, well, people moved into manufacturing because even though those jobs sucked, they were still better than working on a farm in the early modern period. And then everyone's like, "Oh, manufacturers suck." Well, honestly, more people are now alive because of those manufacturing. So it's actually creating, it's allowing for more suffering just by the sheer fact that it's allowing more people to exist.
Yeah.
Which is
And
a strange.
Now we want to build robots that do the manufacturing jobs, and we want to build power plants that clean up the manufacturing process. So
Right.
it's like a natural progression to an intellectual society to deviate away from manual labor, because we're not built like cranes. We're built with squishy, fleshy, biological circuits.
Well, hanging over a rice field or a sugarcane field is not good for your back.
Yeah, it's back breaking.
Yes. But then that's the other thing. It's like you're worried about the uncertainty of your family. Well, wouldn't you want to, okay, so I'm working this labor job, but I have, a son and a daughter, and there's no reason they need to work in such a bad job. So you can work towards the uncertain future of like a positive uncertain future and hope that, well, we're all dealing with hope, but this economic uncertainty, I think, also leads us, and I think I got into this, it leads us to act very rashly in the system. So what we do, when I was talking about those abstraction, you're abstracting your problems into ideology or politics, you end up, if you don't see the whole picture, you don't see a very good picture, you're not used to abstract thought, you're going to see the problem you're not going to get a good sense of the problem, especially if you're not used to doing proper research. Now, I'm not denigrating this. It takes practice, but you see a lot of this in the States where people are going and saying, "Oh, well, it's these interests or that interest or the Jews or something stupid like that." Who are doing this, and there's right now, I think some of the conspiracy theories are around don't get a vaccine because it's just Bill Gates trying to thin out the population, a la some nefarious group of Rome type stuff.
And Hebrew space lasers.
Yeah, that was funny. Rome, for those who don't know, was a group of people, a group of intellectuals who got together and saying, Malthus was the greatest thing to happen in the world since ever. We need to figure out how to depopulate the world in a logical manner. And if you take that into its evil place, like I can see that it's coming from a place of kind of cynical hatred for humanity, but also hope that the world will stop breeding so much. But it doesn't really make sense because every time we get a population boom in the last like 200 years, we've figured out some new type of fertilizer, figured out how to adjust crops to be more bountiful, and figured out how to use less fertilizer. We've been able to increase our yields to 120 to 1, which is
and further to that point, a lot of that progress and productivity came from minimizing the damages we caused from old technologies. So like having a cleaner process that doesn't pollute and damage your soils, or like pesticides that don't kill absolutely everything in the dirt, like the microbes and stuff that you need to grow strong, healthy plants, or like wiping out entire species because we want to clear out the rainforest. There
Yeah.
are aftershocks of ecologies. That's like what an ecology is. It's an interconnected system of complex organisms actively working in complex ways to everyone's best interest. That's how nature works, and that's fundamentally how human beings have progressed as far as we have, is because of our collective efforts in finding unifying goals. And those unifying goals should be not knee-jerk responses to fears or uncertainty or insecurity. Those responses should be based on what's actually best, what is the best approach.
Right. And that takes thought to figure out, because it's not obvious to everybody what we need to be doing. Oh, we need to be getting rid of our society because it's causing pollution. Like, if there's been more reforestation in Europe and China in the last like 100 years than and ever before. So the problem isn't that we just cut down trees because the environment. Like, there's no nefarious mustache twirling capitalist sitting there being like, how can I make people more miserable? How can I squeeze more from the poor people? No, that's not quite right. And it's a conspiracy theory, and like, there's conspiracy theories on the right too, like we were talking about, and that is a knee-jerk reaction. So when you sit down to think about, okay, what are the actual problems? Well, we need more energy, and we need that energy to not destroy ecosystems. Hydroelectric power sounds good, yeah, but it kills a lot of fish. And so
displaces people and floods land and all kinds of things.
But then at the same time, you have economic issues, economic problems. Like, my family might get laid off. Well, not my family. This is hypothetical. I'm self-employed, but so you're worried, and it creates, how do I not have that happen? Well, I need to do this and do that. I need to, rally behind a cause, and it feels good. So you start marching on this or that, and it feels great. It feels like you're getting something done. Like in our activism episode, we talked about this. But you need to start from a principle and a aim that actually isn't from a place of uncertainty. So, and this is going to sound so cliche, but you're uncertain. You have a fear, and uncertainty causes fear. You have an actual problem. And if you act from that fear, you can easily find something, a demon or some kind of cause to, rile against. So you move on to anger. And this is that famous Yoda quote, fear leads to anger, anger leads to the dark side. And this is not, science fiction, pseudo philosophy. This is actually a legit process that happens in our heads, and it's definitely evolutionarily put in there, because you have you're sitting around with your group, and all of a sudden you start seeing weird animal movements, and there's less game, and you have uncertainty about your group. What do? Well, there might be another tribe nearby, so you send out scouting parties, and you encounter another tribe. And then what do you do with that tribe? Well, you assume that they're not going to be that bad for you. You negotiate with them, and you come to an agreement where, no, you kill them. You murder the shit out of them. And that's what we would do in the Paleolithic period, because that kept our tribe alive. But we are beyond that, way, 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 way beyond that. And we have to move beyond that type of behavior by putting our heads together, or maybe having a little hope, or just, and this is probably going to be a lot of the theme on my side of this, is just living with the uncertainty and keep working, although keep apprised. So living with uncertainty is kind of a skill in itself. What's going to happen next? Am I going to be able to, what's the job market going to be at the end of my degree? Well, you'll find out. So that's,
I think you touched on a couple really important factors there. One of them being fear, and fear lends to all kinds of missteps, we'll put it, from either economic sanctions to nationalism to racism and immigration policy and all that kind of nastiness.
Hmm.
But it also leads to knee-jerk reactions over knee-jerk reactions over knee-jerk reactions. If we never stop to think about things cogently, we're always going to be winding up falling into a pit where we're taking 2 steps behind to take 2 steps behind to take 2 steps behind, and we never take 3 steps forward because of it. And a good example of this is like you had mentioned China's reforestation along with Europe, and
Yeah,
one of the funny things about China's reforestation is like they had the idea that planting a bunch of trees across a desert line was going to stop a desert from progressing, and what it did was they planted all of the same tree first of all, so it's like highly susceptible to like one infestation, one natural problem that affects one species of plant. It wipes out your whole tree line because by definition they planted them all along the road. So like that's step number one.
China doesn't really think things through. The European one that I was mentioning was historically, I remember there was a medieval history class I took in one of my first classes. I think one of our watchers was also in the class with me. Okay. Well, our professor noted that there was this giant taiga, so this Canadian shield like forest cross, like going from Spain all the way through to the tip of Russia, and like all the way through Russia, and there was just one giant forest there, which was once the feudal period started, and feudalism and the Roman Empire, all that stuff. These ancient empires just relied on wood as a resource to crazy degree. Sweden was deforested for Viking ships, and in these old societies who relied on wood for fuel in heat and in building materials, deforested it. When I was in Italy, what was strange was I found that this country was actually quite lush, and we were on a historical tour, and a lot of the pictures from World War II showed the terrain. So we were able to see the terrain as it was, in front of us, and we were able to look at the same terrain as it was in World War II. And we were like, well, why did the Canadians have such a hard time attacking this hill? There's so much thing. We look at the picture, and the entire country was deforested for the war effort. And over the last 75 years, they had moved away from a wood economy, and it had allowed things to just slowly grow back and encroach. And this is a process that's still going on because we've moved away from it. And in describing this, I've completely forgotten what the point of this story was. What were you talking about?
I was talking about
it was really interesting.
We're we have a tendency to create another problem when we don't, as a solution to a current problem we haven't thought through.
Yeah. So and that's kind of the whole, like, the Bentham logic again, where if they're poor, just give them money. Solved.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Well, if we have deforestation, let's just plant trees. We've solved deforestation. Ding, 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 ding. And like any geologist or biologist is going to be like, it's a lot more complicated than that. And they
it's
send them
not
off
the
to
same
Gulag.
thing as natural growth. Like a wetland isn't water poured on your front lawn. It's like, it's a wetland. It's got its own biosphere. It's got its own flora and cycles and rhythms, and you know what I mean? Like,
building is a slow process, and change is a slow process. And I think a lot of people want a remedy for their uncertainty, and that uncertainty, that unknown. Oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And we see this with the environmental movement is especially where they have this uncertainty about the future, and they try and put labels on it. The world's going to be a frozen ball of ice by 2012, or the world's going to be a, burning hellscape in 12 years if you don't vote for me. And everyone's like, oh my, that's what's, but the thing is that you have people playing off of this uncertainty. And that's what that is. You say, oh, there's uncertainty here. That can get me elected. And then fear.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people doing this.
It becomes a weapon, though. And that's a lot of what we talk about, too, on this channel, is people weaponizing information for personal or political gain, for power gain, or for... but I think the problem isn't with uncertainty itself, even though that's what we're attributing a lot of it to. It comes down with our the absence of a process for thinking about things from which we are uncertain. So
Right.
it's not the fact that we can't figure out a better way to reforest the planet or to harvest wood. The problem is we're oversimplifying our problems because we want the easiest solution.
Yeah,
Not
and
because it's most economical, which economics would suggest we're doing.
and we
We're actually
rely
looking
on
for the easiest
panaceas.
solution just out of laziness.
If we did this, the economy would be great. If we only did this, and I think we might and that's why whenever we propose, beneficial measures, we never offer them as a panacea. This will help this one thing be slightly better in the long term. It's like,
Yeah.
ooh, that sounds not too attractive. But if we cut all carbon emissions by 2022, which is, I think they said that in 2018, and that's next year, then by 2030 we won't all be dead. It's like,
But there's good reason to want to have immediate measures. Like, we're also not saying that we shouldn't do carbon taxes or we shouldn't have carbon collection. What do you call that?
Carbon capture,
carbon reporting.
Oh, carbon reporting, yeah.
Yeah, from polluters.
Oh no, we need that because that's
carbon
data.
credits. Yeah, exactly. So knowing, unlike what former president said, not knowing doesn't make things go away. Not knowing what the numbers actually are does not make them not there.
Yeah,
but
we lived in Manitoba where it's like there's a flood. What do we do? Oh, well, we should long term help make sure that the flood never hurts anybody. It's like, no, we need to get out there and sandbag like. Toot sweet because it's coming. And we, in the 97 flood, what we did was both. They built that big dike beneath the city. They expanded the floodway, but then everyone in the city also got out and protected people's homes, which were in immediate danger. And this is a good example. I know someone's going to have a critique of something. Well, actually, I hated that mayor or that, premier, and they were terrible and it could have been done better. Everything could have been done better, goof. So it's and the farmers definitely have actual umbrage against that, but it was a long-term and a short-term measures all at once, and it definitely helped Winnipeg in the long run.
And really apropos current events, sort of getting to the climate initiatives and whatnot. The Paris Climate Accord is a good example of this, where we really wanted to do something to give people some type of commitments for them to make government social policies in their own countries, because this is an international agreement. So each diplomat would then go back to their own country and relay the agreement terms that they had all negotiated together and agreed upon. And the point of it was to inspire some sort of impetus to do it immediately, to have some action to work towards a common goal. Perfectly valiant, nothing wrong with that. But where we tend to trip up, and I mean we as in human beings, because we're not capable of knowing everything because of uncertainty, we end up with programs that, for instance, the goal then is to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement terms, right? Mm-hmm. So they find a loophole in the terms so that they can be successful without being successful. And that's where the problem is. When you start burning wood instead of coal, even though wood is less energy dense and causes more pollution,
less efficient.
Because it's less efficient, it causes more pollution. But to determine that an imported wood from another country doesn't count as carbon pollution because it is carbon.
Yeah, Japan
and then
does
burning
that.
wood instead of using oil, which is more energy dense and easier to keep clean through carbon capture, you're creating more pollution to satisfy an accord that is supposed to not cause pollution. It's supposed to diminish pollution.
Japan did that with their forests. They said we're not allowed to cut down any trees or something or only a certain amount, and only in like forest or tree farms where they grow specific, fancy woods. But then they just import everything from Indonesia.
Yeah, it's like, deforesting another part of the planet, and the whole point of it was, we're not supposed to be destroying the planet. You're supposed to all go back to your own countries to help all of us avoid that. Mm-hmm. So I think the way we approach our problems requires, to competently manage our problems, it requires that we deal with uncertainty in rational terms. And I don't think we're doing that insofar as when we approach problems, we compartmentalize or make committees or subcommittees, and
Or we
we
act
try and
emotionally.
specialize our solutions to a world that is not built like that, or a
Like you get
nature that's not built like that.
you get someone like I guess my biggest pet peeve would be AOC at the gate being like, look at what's happening here. And then she's just at the gate crying and everything's politically set. But then, the guard's sitting there like there's no one on the other side of this gate. She's crying in front of an empty field. And so they're fanning uncertainty. What's going to happen if we don't do this? And then they play on emotion. Emotion ramps up that, I don't want to be like, we need to think like Spock, but it ramps up that that illogical engine inside of us and gets us to act irrationally. It's like, oh my, there's a woman crying. We need to do this, and then we need to act now. This is how terrible these people are. Blah 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 blah. But then the Democrats get in and the same thing's happening. It's just as bad.
Yeah,
like,
and that's sort of what itches my crotch about it, is because it's always somebody else's idea that people are hanging their hats on. It's never that they actually believe that thing. They just want to believe it, and somebody who's an authority figure or reputable told them they can believe it. It's okay to believe that this simple solution is the answer to our problem, at least for now, when it's not. It's like financial bailouts without fixing a broken financial system is absolutely absurd. It's insane to think that a crisis went away just because the numbers stopped.
Actually, that sounds really interesting. I'd like to let's move into that, because that type of uncertainty is really interesting. Because the bailouts were a bad idea in my opinion, but you probably know more about that than I do, because that was a knee-jerk reaction from the top. And everyone at the bottom's just like, oh, let the rich people like let their business die. Like that's the whole point of capitalism, is to have these people who are dealing with daily uncertainty and at risk deal with the failure. And they know what they're getting into working in the financial sector. That's the nature of their business, and they can find another job. They've worked for this giant company. Of course they can find it. No, we need a bailout, because what about all the people at the bottom? And so the government knee jerks, bails them out. And that was a poor use of the money. I'm sure you can add more onto that.
The way they went about it was wrong. It's not that the bailouts themselves were wrong, which I believe they were, but that's an opinion. But I can say scientifically that it would not have been hard to simply state any company who receives a bailout cannot pay or cannot buy back their own shares. They cannot pay bonuses to CEOs.
Yes.
Every employee must get a raise. Those are things they could have easily wrote within one sentence. And it doesn't have to say what the raise is. Some people would be jerks and just give people a 2-cent raise. But some effort, some type of preambulatory agreement that states how the money should be used without getting into the minutiae of details and like micromanaging how companies spend their money is necessary. Absolutely necessary. And they thought it wasn't because people were watching. They said, if we give banks these bailouts, what kind of idiot would pay themselves a bonus, buy back their own shares, and take share options that the company pays for? You know what I mean? But they all did it. All of them. Not just some of them, but they all did it. And they caused the crisis. Like, that's literally rewarding somebody for committing a crime. That's having somebody murder and then not only not prosecuting and putting them to jail, giving them a gift for doing it.
And the gift is
the
another
opposite
gun.
of what it was supposed to. Yeah.
Oh, you used up the bullets on killing this guy. Oh, here's some extra ones.
Where the bailouts were necessary, though, it should have been put into receivership. And the problem is you have companies that have infrastructure that people and civilized societies rely on. So a port, for instance, when a port goes bankrupt, you need people who are knowledgeable in how to operate a port. It's not simple. It's very complicated managing that many containers and ships and freight and trucks coming in and out.
Employees,
not security. Blowing things up like Beirut.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of complications to the things that we rely most on, and that's the problem. So like water, sanitation, utilities, power, electric, hydro, everything. Roads. A lot of people think that they're oh, well, the city pays for roads, so that's not private. Well, it's companies, private construction companies who get those city contracts.
Right. And
So
they need to be paid. And then Winnipeg runs out of money after 2 weeks every winter.
yeah. So in a hypothetical scenario, if all construction companies in the entire city went bankrupt, that means nobody has the equipment needed to, like the heavy machinery, the expensive equipment, to order a load of gravel and pack it down with a packer and spread it out with a bobcat and then lay asphalt on top and then press it and heat it. So
Or
not having the infrastructure to actually use the systems we already have is the reason we needed a bailout, is just to keep the infrastructure from collapsing. Because once that collapses, everything else beside it. And that was the mentality to it.
Mhm.
But what they did wrong was, first of all, they came up with numbers out of nowhere. They didn't care who got it, and they didn't check on who spent it, and they didn't criminalize bad behavior.
So the uncertainty led to just give them money.
Yeah, the uncertainty was the knee-jerk reaction. We have to do a bailout. That should have been known within the first day of the financial crisis.
Well, that's why we have experts working
Yeah,
in these
that's
places.
what I mean.
And
The
you have to
experts
listen to
should have
them.
known.
Yeah. Like
So
the
our
advisors.
infrastructures we're securing, so we need a bailout of some kind. We don't know how much yet or who gets it or blah, 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 all those details. But they absolutely needed one just so that people could use money that was in the banks to buy food.
Right.
Otherwise, the bank wouldn't work, and then you couldn't buy food if you didn't already have cash in hand. And
this leads to micro uncertainty that we were like macro being at the top, but this leads to like all of a sudden you were laying the uncertainty and the consequences of what happened in that incident. But then we've seen over the last, has it been 12 years, 13 years now, that
I count from 07, so 14.
Yeah. So I remember I lost my job because the economy decided to, well, I was in Winnipeg working at a paint store at the time, and they laid me off at the height of it when it hit Canada, that economic slump, the recession, which is the big nasty word. I don't even think YouTube will let us use that word. Whatever. But I lost my job, and I'm going like, well, what do I do now? I guess so. I went out, got my, did what the only logical thing seemed to do, and was to start a YouTube channel and get some signs and start protesting at legislature. No, I got my resume together, and I started, pounding the ground, getting those resumes out there. But I couldn't find anything. And then, the place called me back after a month and a half going, oh, we're busy. We need you. It's like, can you afford me? And they're like, doesn't matter. Come over. And so that worked out for me. But for a month of uncertainty, I was just sitting there going, and I was getting more, well, I was going, just sitting there, trying to figure out, okay, where can I apply next? What can I do? Should I go back to school? All this uncertainty. And I'm trying to think this through. Now, I had a halfway decent head on my shoulders, so I probably might have come up with something, but I wasn't like gonna do what I do now. And it's just like, well, I've got skills. I can start a business and work my way up and blah, 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 blah.
The point is you did something with a holistic view of the world around you, right? When the macro system started failing, you said, what can I do to put myself in the best possible position after we fix this bigger problem? Mm-hmm. But the hazard is, like, the moral hazard is what
when I get desperate, or when I start getting like my money was, I had enough for one more month of rent saved up because I was living frugally, and that gave me some time, but I was gonna start getting desperate soon.
But could you imagine though, if your solution was the first thing that came to mind, rather than going to school while learning how to do flooring and while also pursuing romantic relationships? You know what I mean? Like, you were able to say, okay, I'm dealing with this, so I'm going to put it aside now. I'm doing the most I can for that. Now I'm going to deal with this problem as well. And then you figure out the holistic view of this problem, and you make a plan for it, and you stick to the plan, you put it aside, and you start focusing on another problem, right? The issue is when we have a system where you do a knee-jerk reaction to it, like when the government on a macro scale has a knee-jerk reaction to a bailout, that affects you personally as a taxpayer. Maybe not immediately, but it affects you down the line. And what humans are really, really bad at is like the function of time problem, time decay, or like the the loss or increase in value over time, like compound interest, is hard for our brains to actually process. That's where we have problems, because when we make decisions based on a bad reaction from the government in our personal lives, it actually then compounds the problem of the government. You become a less contributing taxpayer by not having a job.
Yeah, I'm not in. Was it? I can't remember who said this, but I'm not taking part in the economy at that point. I'm just kind of, I'm paying I pay rent
Right.
and buying some food, but like that's only going to last a month. But if I'm living like, if I had been saving, and so I had a bit of a cushion. Now, if I have kids and we have no savings, and I get, me and my wife gets laid off, then we have nothing to fall back on. There's no family in nearby that I can, rely on or something. You become very desperate very quick. And that, and almost not unreasonably, you start looking for something like you're going to put your resume out there, but you're going to take chances that you might not have taken 2 weeks ago. You're going to start doing things. You're going to start thinking things. And the chances of you acting out of fear increase to about 100%. And
that's when you get desperate.
That's when you get desperate and you start doing strange things. And I can say this because I can definitely see myself. And I do remember being a bit of a fire breather, acting out of desperation. Because when I was working, I remember working at like Starbucks, and I wasn't getting paid very much, and the job was terrible. And I wasn't eating very much. I was eating maybe to save up, I was eating 2 meals a day, and I was still exercising, and I was using a lot more calories than I was taking in. I was also going to school. So I'm just sitting there, this miserable, dumb, overworked pile of anger. And all of a sudden Occupy comes on and I'm just like, Rah! And like 100% knee-jerk reaction. I had the inclination towards, well, we need to talk about, what do you call it? We need to talk about economic stuff. And I was leaning towards, leftist ideology because, I'm a worker. Worker rights seem like a good thing. They had brushed Marxism up against me in school without actually, forcing me to read it. So it seemed like and then,
that's safe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's safe. And then they, and so, you go to Occupy Wall Street and everyone's like, everything's terrible, blah, 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 blah. Luckily, everyone there was a bunch of morons. So it kind of disillusioned me with that kind of thought process. I met the leader of the Manitoba Communist Party, and I was just not impressed. It's like, oh, wow, this is not a man of action. Yeah. And people were not telling me not to clap because it's bad. So we should be doing this instead of, a sentence.
And those are all forms of control, right? They're trying to manipulate people based on their emotional states as opposed to fix problems that we all recognize are problems existing. So like in the Western world today, there's not a lack of wealth. The problem is that there is a concentration of wealth, right? And distinguishing those one from the other is really crucial because on the one hand, you have people opposing income distribution because they think that money is going to be stolen from them. And that's never been proposed. Well, I mean, somebody's probably proposed it, but that's not the competent approach.
Just give them money.
Stealing money from rich people doesn't fix a problem of people accumulating wealth.
And what happens if you accidentally become rich? Like, we should kill all rich people, and all of a sudden you win the lottery and you're rich. It's like, oh no.
Yeah.
Like people,
but that's what people get their backs up against. But what's really funny to me is that somehow the super wealthy people in the States specifically, I'm speaking, have lobbied enough support from people who will never see that kind of wealth in their lives, no matter what. They just will never see tens of billions of dollars, like in equivalent spending power terms, because there isn't that much in circulation around the world. So you've got like groups of the 30% top income earners thinking that the world is trying to steal all their money when literally only 1% of those 30% are going to be taxed fairly.
Well, and where do they
That's
even
what
learn
they're
this?
talking about.
The hypocritical part of all of this is that where do they learn this? They learn this on a global information network where the sum total of human knowledge is at their fingertips. So they have access to indoor heating, plumbing, air conditioning, all this stuff where which would have costed, like, been only available to maybe the king or an emperor before, and now the poorest people can go talk to people on the other side of the planet instantly. You can go to the library, and like we have these giant libraries all over all of our cities, and if that's not that's an outdated technological medium. And
Dude, grocery stores,
right?
Like, peasants can walk into a store without being harassed or molested or robbed. They can choose what they want off the shelf with a label telling you what's in it, so you know exactly what nutritional value, what the price is. Like, procurement of food used to be an issue for everybody for millennia.
Yeah.
That used to be hard. We've solved that problem, and we still don't have the gumption to go online and look something up to see if it's true, even though it's in our pocket and we're already paying for the plan. It's too much work to pull out your phone and check.
Yeah.
And that laziness is what inspires our creativity, and it's also like what makes us such powerful creatures, able to build machines and study and remember things and abstract concepts. It's all just path of least resistance. We're trying to make the easiest life for ourselves. So laziness isn't fundamentally a bad thing. It's the exaggerated application, the exaggerated application of laziness.
In conjunction with restlessness, because if you're sitting there going like, oh, I'm bored, oh, this sucks, blah, 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 you're gonna be like, I wonder if I could make this better if I did that. And so you start to think about what you can do. But if you're afraid of the consequences, you're afraid, oh, if I make this, what could happen? Oh, I better not. And that's
or fear of not acting soon enough. Like sometimes that fear could make you think that you don't have time to think.
Right. Well, I definitely feel that when, like, is my thesis, is it too late, or I should get it done quicker? It'll be done when it's done. And you should be doing your research and making it up to date in conjunction with what's happening. Well, even this podcast, it's like, oh, well, if we don't get this podcast out, we're going to start saying stuff that is out of date. It's like, we're just talking. Or, like, I get an idea, I want to start a business, and it's like, oh, is the market already flooded? If I don't get in now, others, and this is that uncertainty. It drives me. But at the same time, I still have to be careful. I can't just be like, blah, there it is. I have to still be deliberate. But at the same time, the uncertainty can also force me to not act at all, which is, I think, what happens with a lot of individuals in our society. They're scared of failure when failure is probably the most useful thing they could get. Like, oh, success is great, but failure,
and success isn't guaranteed because of uncertainty. You could have the best idea, execute it the best, and the strongest work ethic, and it could still fail just by bad luck. Bad luck is a thing. Like, it's possible that just probabilistically, even if a 98% chance of you're succeeding doesn't happen, that's because there's 2% chance that it doesn't happen. That means twice out of every 100 it won't happen, no matter how well you do and how good the plan is. So uncertainty is underpinning everything we do and everything we fear, as well as everything we respond to, as well as the way we respond to things. And identifying the uncertainty reaction versus the uncertainty mitigation, harm mitigation, like the reduction of the negative consequences of doing nothing or of doing the wrong thing. That's really important to planning. And without planning, you can't do anything intelligent. You might by accident every once in a while, but you won't repeat the intelligent behavior without an awareness that that behavior is in your best interest.
Yeah. I think the other side of this is, I don't know, that cliche, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And
Gretzky, by the way.
Gretzky.
Canadian.
Thank you. Yeah. But a Canadian philosopher, Dr. Wayne Gretzky. He's probably got a. He's not a doctor.
He could be.
He's a prophet. Yeah. So if you're watching this not in Canada,
we like hockey in Canada.
We like it's
like Italian football.
So this is it's a cliche, but it demonstrates something that I'm noticing a lot in this, almost post-scarcity society of ours, where you have everything you want. You don't have war knocking at your door. You have all this comfort and wealth inherent to your situation in the lower middle class. And you're living beyond the dreams of a Roman emperor. And you are scared. So you don't let your kids go beyond the sidewalk. So you
organize sports, and you won't let them drive, and airplanes are dangerous, and organic foods, like it crosses all these boundaries.
You stay at the same job without uncertain of it, and you don't take a risk, and you live a riskless life. I think there's that one episode of Star Trek where he realizes what happens when he lives a life without risk, and he's just this like the captain he sees like, oh look, this is what you are if you didn't take that risk and you didn't learn that risks and failure lead to growth. And he just sees himself as this like boring lieutenant, working a menial job, and he's just like, oh wow. And they straight up tell him, it's like, yeah, we don't see you in a position of authority or command because you're just not that type of guy.
Be a man.
And that's it. And so he's just like, oh boy. And he asks the godlike entity, take me back, put me in the situation. And like, he just, he goes back and he gets stabbed and he starts laughing. It's like, this is the best thing that could have happened to me. He gets stabbed right through the heart. And, and he understands that risk of standing up for his friends in a bar fight led him to a situation where he understood that you don't win anything by playing it safe. You don't grow as a person, because we're all going to take hits. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. You're always going to take a hit in your life. Whether or not you learn something from it is the real test. And that, I think that leads into this, but I think if we can talk about safety for a bit, that would be, because I have massive feelings on this. If someone says, oh, but it's not safe, that's like a dirty word in my head, and I don't like it. Oh, well, the students won't be safe if they come to class. It's like, duh. Like, have you seen what children do without COVID? Like,
they eat dirt.
Yeah. And
maybe we should we'll take a break first, and then we'll transition a bit from strict uncertainty on macro populist levels down to insecurity and uncertainty in mental health and personal levels after the break.
Remember, if you or anyone you know is facing an uncertain future, please call Frivolous Gravitas padding and security services immediately, and we will give you a life without any uncertainty. That's 1-800-NO.
No.
All right. See you guys in the part 2.
Back with Jordan the Hammer Shapiro after this. Stay tuned.